Welcome back to Medical Compliance with Clarissa. I'm Clarissa Benfield, our Global Director and Business Line Leader for our medical and laboratory business at Intertek. And today we are having a very special podcast episode. We had a bunch of members from our medical team at the MedTech Conference in Toronto, Canada. We had a fantastic time learning about all of the innovations that are happening in the medical device industry, talking to MedTech manufacturers, learning more about the FDA and how they're viewing AI and ML and machine learning for medical devices, and so much more. I'm really excited to have discussions with multiple guests. So look forward to listening in and hearing more about the MedTech Conference. So it was a big week last week at the MedTech Conference. Lots of new technologies, new trends, things that we were seeing. From your perspective, what are some of the industry trends or technology trends that you see emerging in the medtech space?
I love seeing the innovation, right? It's always about innovation year after year. I loved seeing the robotics. I loved seeing the AI-enabled devices, the home healthcare equipment that's out there. There was one, I won't mention who it was, but there's a manufacturer that's out there that they were always promoting the fact that they have better, safer, smarter healthcare. And I think that's just a common theme year after year. So yeah, and in addition to that, another one, we talk about software a lot. I was really surprised at how many people were there to talk about software as a medical device. And you talk to them for 60 seconds about it, and then all of a sudden you have to have that follow-up conversation about cybersecurity. And some sound like they're in a little bit better place than others with a little bit of a head start. Some are still getting educated or up to speed on it. But between the two of them, the software as a medical device, and then having to know what those cybersecurity requirements are as well.
So Ray, after the conference, can you tell me what trends that you've seen emerging in the medtech space?
Absolutely. Some of the trends that I've seen are a continuation going back to COVID, right? And what I mean by that was with the pandemic, the medtech industry was very focused on how do we do home care? How do we do diagnostic testing? How do we do preventative care? And a lot of the trends are for the diagnostics, they are focusing in on how do we get home care for this, right? And so I sat in on an innovation for the investment landscape for diagnostic testing, right? And we have all these great ideas that are coming out, but they have to be beneficial, right? There has to be clinical evidence. It has to be very beneficial for that. So a lot of these clients are using robotics. They're using AI and software to do that. And here's how, because sometimes some manufacturers or the industry was very apprehensive on using robotics and specifically artificial intelligence and software. So one of the trends that's happening for therapy, right? There's a shortage of physical therapists in the industry. And what the industry is saying with some of the AI and robotic therapy devices, so think of maybe something that's for rehab on a knee. Because there's not enough physical therapists, they don't have enough time to spend with specific patients, right? And so with robotics and AI and software, they can get somebody set up, right? They can set the protocol and say, okay, start using this robotic therapy for X therapy, right? And then they can move on to the next patient. While that patient is going through the therapeutic session, the AI can actually monitor the movement, what's going on, and provide some clinical data so that when the therapist comes back, they're able to actually figure out better care in a more timely manner, right? So they're augmenting that type of data. So with AI and robotics, one of the biggest trends on how do we augment that as well. A lot of manufacturers in the industry is utilizing the software aspect to support the physical medical devices. And that's a very big trend that I noticed during the conference.
So Fayez, after the MedTech conference, were there any trends or things that you saw coming after, spending 3 days just fully immersed in the conference?
I mean, yeah, definitely. The biggest thing that caught my eye was the advancement of technology in terms of AI that's being implemented into a lot of these products. It's pretty cool, right? Because you got a lot of products already out in the market, but some of the things that these businesses and these manufacturers are doing to help streamline their efficiencies, and on top of that, implementing AI into a product to help patient care evolve is just it's unreal. Like some of the stuff was just awesome.
So after such a great week at MedTech last week, tell me, what are some of the trends that you see or that you saw at the conference emerging in the MedTech space?
One of the biggest trends that I saw that just kind of personally resonated with me was just the demand for women in the medtech space. There were a couple panels I attended, and they're asking for women in positions of power. So they want female CEOs. They're addressing more women-centric health issues. So that was definitely one of the biggest trends I saw that related to me.
So after the conference last week, what trends are you seeing emerging in the medtech space? What innovations did you see? What are some of the interesting things that came to light for you from medtech?
You know, when you go to certain trade shows and conferences, often you see like a kind of a blend of different parts of the industry, but this really was more tech than med almost, to a point, for some of the people that I spoke to. There was a real emphasis on moving the industry forward, blending other parts of technology that are out there in the world into the medical space. And so obviously kind of the big buzzword in the industry that everyone was kind of talking about was AI and machine learning and things of that nature. And so a lot of the companies and a lot of the conversations that I had revolved about, how do we translate that into our existing product base? Can we? Is it worth it? Or is it basically better to take that and implement into our future products? And so there was a huge topic of conversation on that with most people I talked about, just because I think that was kind of the sector of the industry that I was having most of my conversations with.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, right? And I think for a market that's as mature as the medical devices space, to see this real infusion of technology and infusion of tech, right? A lot of new players who are trying to enter into this space, as you say, either incorporating technologies or developing products with these new technologies. It really is exciting to see, it's not just the same devices that have been on the market for the last 20, 30, 40 years, but now we're seeing this really big emphasis on tech and how you can use technology in the medical space, right? How you can use it to further, development, further research, right? In terms of diseases, predictability, right? All of those things. So I think that's such a great point, right? There really was a big emphasis on the technology side, right? And especially, as you say, with everything that we're seeing with AI and machine learning for medical devices, right? There's just a lot there and probably a lot more to come.
Yeah. And I think, people that I was talking through the conversation I was having there, it's like it's leveraging doctors before always leveraging kind of their local network and the people that they dealt with and within either their hospital network or their kind of surrounding whoever they graduated med school with. Now we're able to aggregate that knowledge database and put like algorithm and science behind it a little bit more, rather than just conversational and gut feeling on things. And so it's helping to be quicker, more concise answers with more data behind them, rather than just a centralized local group of people to bounce things off of.
Yeah, definitely moving things forward a lot faster for sure.
Yeah, and so a lot of that kind of lends over. I don't remember which player's box it was or whose booth I was with, but 80% of all FDA approved devices that are AI right now are on the imaging space. And so maybe not walking into the show, I didn't realize the shortages that we're experiencing in the radiology sector. And so being able to give the finite number of people that are able to treat and diagnose those situations more concise answers with a science background behind them has really helped giving more educated decisions for everybody that's trying to treat the patient.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I was most kind of excited to hear about too, right? Because you hear all of these trends about, all of these boomers getting older and people requiring more care, right? There's such an influx of patients, right? So many more people who need access to healthcare for chronic or acute conditions, right? And at that same time, this decline in the availability of doctors, right? They're retiring at the same rate. So really seeing how these technologies are being used to fill the gap and like the plan to fill the gap, so there won't just be this, gap in coverage and gap in care, I think is really exciting. And all of the technologies, everything that you're talking about, right? Like aggregating data and be able to have, additional information. Information is such power in this case, right? Especially in the medical space. So it's really exciting to see. And I was really thrilled by that too, right? Just to see so much development that's really being focused in the technology and AI to be able to then, better support patients and give more people access to care.
Yeah, and even like once they've identified that, hey, there's an issue and we need to either, review this polyp, or let's just use a polyp as an example, is it something that we need to remove? And when they go all the way to the stage of removal, did we get it all, right? So there's not reoccurrence down the road. So it was really interesting to be able to have them look at immediate detection and then ongoing support for, reoccurrences down the road. So very, very impressive technology.
Yeah. So from a technology standpoint, were there interesting technologies or innovations, things that you saw that you think are going to be super impactful, change the medical device space over the next, 12 months, 3 years, 5 years, in terms of the technologies and innovations themselves?
Absolutely. I was blown away by some of the innovation. This stuff is changing healthcare and it's changing treatment. Some of I saw a camera that was the size of a hair, right? So this stuff is microscopic and it's crazy how fast everything is moving.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, right? When you think about how far technology has come and just all of these new innovations that are being brought forth and just what that's going to mean for healthcare in general. Some of the really advanced technologies, of course, and then the incorporation of digital, right? Everything that we're seeing with software, things that we're seeing with AI. So are there any specific things related to artificial intelligence or machine learning, things that you saw that you were either surprised by or things that you thought were interesting in the AI space and as it's impacting the medical device market?
Absolutely. There were a few innovations that were looking to implement AI to kind of speed up the process of diagnostics and image review for X-rays or other processes. And there's a lot more push for software as a medical device too. I saw a call out for that and just a lot of interest surrounding that as a topic.
So we talked a little bit about emerging innovations, right? And I think you touched on the AI and robotics. Of course, I think AI was probably one of the biggest topics that we saw at MedTech this year. It has been at, the last couple of years, it was at CES with the digital health summits over the past few years. So are there any things within that specifically? You gave a great example, but any other, exciting technologies that you saw, innovations that you think might be transformative over the next 3 to 5 years? Obviously, there's so many people presenting their products at MedTech. You mentioned the diagnostic space. Is there anything else that jumped out to you? Anything exciting that you were seeing?
I think a lot of it goes back to the software and AI. And the reason being is that when you talk about getting a product to market, one of the trends that I've noticed is there clinical evidence, right? How does it get reimbursed, right? And so a lot of the sessions I attended, it was, yes, does it work clinically, but what's the clinical benefit, right? And the hardware is always the same, per se. A robot's a robot, right? Surgical tools are surgical tools, but it is the software and the intellectual property of the AI. And again, they're using that to augment the current application, right? And that's how they actually get an advantage to make sure that it gets reimbursed, right? So a lot of the companies are trying to incorporate AI. Now, that's not just with surgical. It could be go back to the home healthcare, right? When you're at the home healthcare, how do you get patients to be engaged, right? You can have this great therapy plan, but if they're at home not engaged, there's no benefit. So one of the things they're doing to dumb it down is they're almost like making some of the applications to do the therapy almost like a home game on an app, like Candy
I
Crush
love
or
when they
something.
said that. Yeah, I love when they said that, right? Of making it, because I think you really did. You got the point across, right? I mean, it's absolutely that it's great if you have this technology. It's great if it's available, but if people aren't using it, there's absolutely no point, right? There's just no reason to have it. And so this idea of making it more fun, making it more interactive, making it like a game, I thought that was such an interesting point. And it's like, we hear people all the time, even in your day-to-day life, right? The step count, right? Everyone's looking at their watch, they're looking at their phone, they're looking at their ring, right? To say, oh, did I hit my steps today? How many steps did you have, right? And it's this kind of competition, this, being in control of your health data, but in a fun way. I thought that was super interesting in the home health session. So with some of the things that you saw, and just kind of this overarching, there's a lot of positivity, right? There's a lot of excitement that was going around, but still there are some challenges that exist, right? For medical device manufacturers, for people in the med tech space. Are there things that you saw that either people were bringing and talking to you about that they were maybe concerned about, or things that you see that will be a big challenge for med device manufacturers over the next, 12 months, 3 years, 5 years?
I don't know if there were as much the challenges that people were talking about. To be honest, one of the things that really jumped out at me that, maybe the most about what people were talking about was the focus on the patient, and maybe the challenge to continue to put them at the focus, right? So there was one session where we heard from Michelle Tarver and Jeff Shern from the FDA talking about that, and this 15-year run that Dr. Shern has had, where he always put the patient at the focus. And then for Dr. Tarver, and congratulations to her in her new role, saying that she's going to continue that. So when you look at these manufacturers, it's an industry of innovation, it's an industry of devices, and yet they have to put the patient first. And maybe that is a challenge. You can't overlook the patient. So,
Yeah.
Maybe that's a challenge for manufacturers sometimes who are trying to have a competitive edge. They're trying to make revenue, but it has to be about the patient. So you can never lose sight of, the patient outcome and the patient need and the patient journey, just in a race for a new innovation. The innovation has to be the how, not the why, I think.
One of the things that actually, caught my attention was the fact, this being held in my backyard in Toronto, and seeing how a lot of these innovations are coming up in Canada, right?
Mhm.
Really caught my attention because you see some of the cool things happening within the industry and the amount of work and innovation that's been, put in place by some of these manufacturers and businesses. It's really a compelling story how far, the Canadian manufacturing medical industry has come from, even 10 years ago,
Mhm.
when I was kind of working with them, right? So it's amazing. I mean, there's so many cool things happening within the industry. It's ever evolving, and with all the changes happening with technology, I'm really impressed with what these manufacturers are building.
Yeah, it's fantastic to hear you say that. I think that's a really great point, right? This was the first time that the MedTech Conference was ever held in Canada, right? It's always held in the US, different US cities every year, different pockets where there's medical device technology and development. So to have it, being held in Toronto, right in your backyard in Canada, all of the Canadian manufacturers that came out, right, in full force, the Canadian associations, Canadian regulators, right, MedTech, there were just so many people who were there representing Canada and representing the Canadian medical market, and really, putting out a big emphasis and a big focus on, hey, like, we're here, we're developing medical products too. There's local market for medical products in Canada. There's medical products from Canada that are being shipped all over the world, right? It's really great to hear you say that, because it was the first time that we were there. I just, there's a lot of energy from the Canadian manufacturers and, the Canadian people who are like, oh, this is so great to be having, thousands of people from all around the world who are invested in the medtech industry right there in Canada. Are there things that you see as, challenges that the industry is going to be facing, especially with trying to bring some of these products to market, obstacles that are coming in the med tech space, or things that people were talking about that have been either a concern or something that is causing them a challenge?
Yeah, I feel like the two largest challenges I was hearing from people I was having conversations with were number one, from an insurance standpoint, making sure that they can get insurance coverage or insurance reimbursement, because a lot of the startups and the new people that are entering the space, not necessarily always from a medical background, but some people from a tech background, they have financial backers that they need to make sure that they can reciprocate and get back to. And so a big portion of that is being able to make sure that they can get insurance coverage, because otherwise some of these can be very costly to adhere to a patient. So that was a major obstacle that I think people are still looking how they can navigate, because I think insurance is learning based off what the FDA is currently learning, which is based off what the manufacturers are kind of learning. So it's a chain effect to be able to prove validity and how something will work. That was one major obstacle that people were experiencing. Then the other one was the FDA and Health Canada, and going through the regulatory process with them, because they're kind of learning on the fly as well to an extent. And they tend to err on the side of caution of the patient, which obviously makes sense. But there's as the industry is learning together in collaboration, I think this may be hesitant from sometimes to just green light something that might be new coming to the industry without full validation of it. So proving beyond just, hey, this works on the patient today and this one unique person that we've treated so far, to give blanket approval from an FDA standpoint, from an insurance standpoint, is still a work in process around some of these new products that are coming to market.
So with the customers that you talked to while you were there, manufacturers in the industry, the different sessions that you sat through, What do you think might be one of the biggest challenges that people were talking about, or challenges that they might be facing going forward in the medtech space, especially as we're seeing, innovation and development moving so quickly?
I think the speed of movement with innovation and development is in conflict right now with some of the regulations that are put out. So personally, I was able to talk to a few manufacturers, people from the notified body side as well, and there was a bit of frustration surrounding specifically the MDR. I attended a session where we had a notified body, a manufacturer, and people from the commission as well on the board, and it seems everybody wants to get to a point where there's harmony, but we're not quite there yet.
So was there anything you saw, related to maybe challenges that you think the industry might be facing? You touched a little bit on the reimbursement thing. That's always a hot topic, of how these devices and, how manufacturers are getting reimbursed and going through the reimbursement process. But anything you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, some of the challenges, the common theme was, again, for startup companies or existing companies that have just different divisions, acquisitions, new people there, is knowing the regulatory path, right? Because it's one thing, again, you have this great idea, but hitting those milestones. So specifically, again, when I sat into the innovation for investment for diagnostic technology, a lot of that discussion was on, how do you get investors? How do you get investment money? And again, it's making sure you know what step to go, right? Just from not from the only the clinical standpoint, but then you have the manufacturing the device, right? The regulatory requirements for the device and the reimbursement. A lot of the challenges is that there's new people in the fields, right? And the education are gone. You had mentioned that doctors are retiring. Well, some of the healthcare technology professionals in the field, they're also retiring as well, right? And so that's leaving a gap of knowledge. So there's always a need for knowledge, right? And again, that's why I believe that the MedTech conference is one of the best conferences, because it's an incubator of knowledge and sharing ideas. But that's one of the things that I notice is that as technology goes, you still have to have the people to execute it from the various stages of what it takes to keep a medical device and solution on the market. And again, from the technology, the hardware, the reimbursement, clinical trials, so on and so forth. So there's always that need for for education, because what's good for AI in the United States might be slightly different in Canada, as the CDHR conversation meant, which might be different in Europe and rest of the world as well. So it's always keeping up with the knowledge, because again, there's a lot of time and money, and you want to get it right the first time. So the challenges are just making sure, do you have the right network or resources in your whole portfolio and network of resources to make sure the product gets to market quickly and effectively?
Yeah, well, it was a buzzword in one of the FDA sessions that I sat through that they were using. We're trying to be as transparent as possible. Like, they reiterated the word transparent, which sometimes from a government entity you may not always get, but it's encouraging to say that they're willing to rely on their peers that are not just the peers of the FDA panel. They're willing to talk and be open-minded with manufacturers because they have their expertise in that portion of the product development. They're willing to be open to talk to test labs because they are expertise on what they deem to be safe out there in the industry. And so real transparency in conversations over the border between Canada and the FDA on their individual learnings has really been encouraging to see, because there's no real expert. It's a collaboration of everybody's mind for the better health of everybody.
Yeah, and I love that word, right, with the transparency, right, and the working together. And I think, Dr. Shuren has done a great job over his tenure at the FDA, really pushing this messaging and really pushing towards this. And then with the FDA being the chairs for IMDRF this past year in 24, you really see this push towards the harmonization, right, working together, transparency across the industry, again, with ultimately the patients at the center of everything, right, and thinking about patient care. So I love hearing you say that as well, because they're really trying to push out that messaging to industry, and I think that it's definitely coming across.
Absolutely.
But the other funny thing about, not funny, but the other thing about whether it's the folks at the FDA or the manufacturers, the stakeholders, doctors that may be there, and healthcare providers, the engineers that are at these companies designing products, the regulatory professionals that that we get a chance to talk to, they're extremely passionate about what they do, their role in it, their belief that they're making the world a better place for people. So it's inspiring, it's refreshing. Everybody really is passionate about it. I for years I've worked with customers, and I thought that some of the fire protection engineers were some of the most passionate engineers that I'd ever worked with. And I think the the med device folks are absolutely right up there, tied, if not having surpassed them. They really believe in what they're doing. So it's, that's refreshing.
Thank you so much for joining the podcast today and listening in on everything we learned at the MedTech Conference. It was such an exciting event and one of the best weeks of the year. So great to have so many people together from the medical industry, from doctors and physicians to regulators to manufacturers and everything in between. We had such a fantastic time being there and can't wait for next year. If you have any questions on the things that we talked about or would like to have one-on-one discussions, as always, please reach out. Thanks so much for listening in.